Hi, I'm David, and welcome to another Winning Solutions Microsoft Access tutorial video. Today we're going to be making a video on FileMaker Pro, which is advertised as a simpler database solution, one that's easier to learn, one that's simpler to use, easier to customize, that gives you a higher database capacity than Access, and all these things. Now, the point of this video is certainly not to disparage FileMaker. If you use it and it works for you, great. But what we want to do here is make a point that all of these things can be done in Access, can be done better in many cases, and at a lower cost with more convenience. So I want to tell you that Access could do all of these things. And full disclosure, we are a Microsoft shop. We use Access, we use .NET, we use SQL Server. Again, this is not to disparage FileMaker Pro in any way, but I'm going to talk about all the things you can do with Access and how something that seems easier isn't necessarily always easier. Okay, so like I said, Access can do all of those things. Access gives you flexible licensing and a very low cost. It's very scalable. The big thing is programming. Access is programmable, whereas FileMaker Pro is not. VBA Programming, which is the programming language that comes packaged with Access. If you're going to make an application, a business application, a robust application that is flexible and it's easy to use and it's powerful and it can handle all sorts of users and all sorts of data and yet can be distributed very easily right across the network of your small business, then Access is the way to go. And if you're going to make a truly powerful application, it's got to be software. It's got to be programmed. There's really no way around that. And so the ability to include VBA makes the application that much more powerful, that much more customizable. And we're going to get in with some demonstrations to that. Apps can use a web, iOS, Android, Mac interface. Again, we talk about use on multiple platforms. Well, Access can be used on multiple platforms. We put data on Microsoft SQL Server and remote desktop services. Access can be run in any web browser on any major platform. This does require third-party server software, but the good news is you can use third-party server software with this. You can use SQL Server with Access. Access also has scripts, as FileMaker has it, which are basically macro commands, but it's so much more flexible than that because you can write programs in code that can basically customize down to whatever level you need to be customized down to. And robust security can be programmed and added in SQL Server, and we can also use Active Directory to authenticate users. So let's go through this in a little more detail, point by point. Now let's talk about licensing cost. Now with FileMaker, the minimum you're going to get, if you get the basic version, it's $19 per user per month. And that gives you 3 applications, and they have to be run on FileMaker Pro servers. Now, Access licensing is very flexible. Now, $139 will get you a perpetual license. You get 5 years of support from product data. You can also subscribe to what's called Microsoft 365. Used to be Office 365. You can get that as little as $5 to $10 a month. And with Access, you can have unlimited applications. You can develop as many databases as you want. You could use them on your Office computer. You could distribute them across your network. You can host them on a web page. You're not limited to a particular server or type of server. You can put this anywhere you want, distribute it any way you want, and any number of applications you want, and you can, if you just one that you want to use on your desktop, fine, you can do it there too. There's also a free Access runtime so that only developers need paid licenses. If you have 20 people in your organization who use Access, but only 2 of them do development work, well, you only need 2 paid licenses. You can compile a program, you can compile an Access database, distribute the compiled version, and everyone else can run it with the free Access runtime. You don't need seat licenses for all 20 people. Now, availability. Access applications can be run from Windows. It can be run from a network file share. There's no server needed for that. You don't need to use an Access server or a Microsoft server to run your software. You can run it on the desktop. You can run it on the web. You can run it over a network. No problem. FileMaker Pro Essentials limits you to just 3 applications, which must be run on FilePro servers. One user using a single database file for access on a desktop to hundreds of users running a .NET application. You can, like I said, you can run from your desktop, share with others, distribute on your network. You can run infinite number of applications, and you can run it in many, many different ways. Now, scalability and capacity. Now, Access has a 2 gigabyte limit. That is true. So it does natively have a lower database limit than FileMaker. They claim to have 8 gigabytes. Access is 2 gigabytes. However, data in Access is easily migrated to SQL Server. Once you even approach a 2 gigabyte limit, you really want to use a central network storage, whether that be on a local SQL server on your network or whether it's a cloud server. Once you get up to certain levels of data, you want to do that. If you're in a small business, 1, 2, 3 employees, you're probably not going to run up to 2 gigabytes all that quickly. We find that, a lot of starter databases, until you get really big or you're around for a long time and you accumulate lots and lots of data, that's when it begins to run slow. That's when you start to get close to 2 gigabytes. But for most small users, it's really not that bad a limit. 2 gigabytes is a lot of data, especially if you're not putting in attachments, pictures, and things like that. Now, SQL Server, you can upsize, and that will go up to 10 gigabytes for the Express Edition. The Express Edition is free for commercial use. It easily scales up to 100 plus users and 10 gigabytes of data. And of course, what you could do, and what we often recommend, is a split database where you have the data on SQL Server, but the application is developed in Access. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the flexibility of Access, but you get the speed and capacity of SQL Server. In fact, if your data is on SQL Server, you can actually have both an Access front end and even a .NET front end in a web-based application, and both of those can use the same data source. Again, you're not dependent on a particular type of proprietary server here. One minor thing, but very important, is that you have a finer choice of data types. If you're going to have a column in Access that's a numerical column, well, that column can be a byte, which takes up only 1 byte of data. It can be a long integer, which takes up 4 bytes of data. You can have currency, money, single, double. You have all of these different data types, and it might seem unimportant, but what's the difference whether this ID number or whatever, whether this numeric data type takes up 1 byte or 4 bytes. Well, when your data table contains, hundreds of thousands of records, it does start to make a difference. So if you can control the amount of space that your data uses, you won't hit that 2 gigabyte ceiling quite so fast, and it'll be more efficient. Now, platforms and web publishing. Now, products such as Thinfinity Virtual UI or Microsoft Remote Desktop Services, you can run this in any browser on any major platform. So the platform independency is something you can certainly do with Access. Through third-party software, an Access database can be published to the web, and Windows Active Directory may be used for user authentication. FileMaker Pro cannot do this. So in other words, you can set up an application that's accessed over the web. But of course, now if your Access database is accessed over the web, you're certainly going to want to control access to it, who logs in. You want to have usernames and passwords. Well, those usernames and passwords on a Windows server can be tied into Active Directory. Active Directory is what controls all the Windows user accounts. In other words, you can have Windows user accounts tied into the security for the database. Scripting and programming. So Access has macros, just as FileMaker has scripts. They're basically, I won't say they're the same thing, but they're similar concepts. But a full-fledged programming language like Visual Basic, now Access has a different version. It has Visual Basic for applications, but structurally it's mainly the same language. And I cannot underestimate the power that this can add to your applications. You can only do so much with scripts. Even in Access, macros can only do so much. If you want to truly unleash the power of your applications, there's really no getting around programming. And the ability to write commands and being able to program your forms and program your reports, or layouts as they call them in FileMaker. The ability to flexibly program these things is enormous. And again, we're going to show you some examples for that. For forms, speaking of forms, there are third-party controls, ActiveX controls that you can use for forms, and you can find all sorts of function libraries which add to the base functionality of the language. Again, you're not limited just to what comes out of the box with Access. The Thinfinity server software that I mentioned earlier, well, that has a programming library that you need in order to make it run, but you can import this programming library into into the programming, into the VBA. You can import this library so you have all this extra functionality that wasn't included out of the box with Access. Well, that's very important to keep in mind. So how can the addition of a programming language make a database that much more powerful? I'm going to use a couple of sample databases here to demonstrate. Let's start with this customers form. So I got a very basic, bare bones database that I use to demonstrate these types of things. It's your typical customer order system. Anyway, the point of this is for demonstration purposes. It's not very fancy, but I have a customers form here that I can use for filtering. Now, how do I do this? Well, how the application works is I can type in any part of the first or last name and search for the person I'm looking for. Anyone with a C in the first or last name. So you get the idea. Now, how does this work? Well, let's go under the hood a little bit. And I don't want to make this an Access lesson or a VBA lesson, but the point of doing this demo is to show you the power that VBA programming can give to your database in a way that scripts or macros, even the macros that are in Access, cannot. So what I have here, and this is something that you can do in Access, I can drop a text box here, an unbound field. Now, I'm going to call it a field just because it's an entry field. It's kind of terminology, but this is not a field in the same way that you might see like in FileMaker. This is, when I click out of this, you see the word unbound. And what that means is this is not bound to any table. This is not, this is independent of any table or anything like that. But I can type something in here and then use this search button. So let's go into VBA code. Now this may look foreign, hard to understand. Again, my purpose here is not to teach VBA coding, but just to show you, I'm just going to take you the basics here. When I press that button, or when I update the search box, we call a function called name search. And now I can say, well, okay, if it's blank, then we're going to turn off filtering and we're going to show all records. If it's not blank, then I can take me, that's the form, set the filter of that form equal to, and then I can type in a search string like this. So, I can control this to a much finer level than I could do with just a script. Oh, and another thing with the coding, I'm going to show you that coding window again. And this is a different form, but one thing you can do is we're not just limited to what Microsoft Access gives us. If I go into references, now again, you can load third-party libraries, you can load third-party controls, third-party scripts. I have something checked here. No, it's not checked here. It's in this list somewhere. But the server application that we use to host Access databases on the web, well, that server package comes with a language library, a code library that I need to include in a project in order to make that functionality appear. The functionality that makes me able to put this database on the web if I wanted to, that functionality is not a native part of Access. It doesn't come out of the box. I have to add it. Now that's a library obviously that comes with the server software. But you can see there's all sorts of stuff here. If I want to go to ODBC provider, OLADB, if you don't know what these are, that's okay. The take home here is that there's several Outlook libraries here. There's OneNote, there are Excel. So if you want to program and make a program that handles an Excel spreadsheet, make a program that handles a .NET. So you can include any one of these libraries to extend the language. It's not just what you have out of the box. So that's the big thing that scripting can't give you. Now this is the orders form. And the way this is set up right now, I can change the person who is the customer on this drop down. That's probably not a good idea in a regular app, but this is a demo, so fine. I can go to any order and I can add. I want to add 5 cell phones to this order. There we go. Updates the price, and again there is a total box here. That's where the total is. And so what I could do is whenever we add an item, I can run a procedure called update order total. That update order total is in a separate module. This module is not attached to any form or any layout. It's a programming module that's completely freestanding. And what this does is it updates the total. It goes into the orders table. If you add an item, it goes into the orders table and updates the total for that order. So again, there's several ways you could do a task like that, but I'm doing this to demonstrate the idea of the programming. You can program any one of these buttons. I program this button to delete an item from an order, and you can control this on a much finer detail than you could for by just scripting. If I want to sell, let's say I change a cell phone order to 100, not allowed to sell more than 50 of this item. Okay, so I have logic in there. Let's press escape to erase that. There is logic in here, programming logic, branching logic that says if, I'm going to go into, let's see, this is going to be triggered after the text box is updated. You can really control this so finely. It's very powerful, a lot of different events and ways you can manipulate this. And it says, okay, before that is updated, because I don't want this to go into the database yet. I want to check to see if we entered more than 50. Because if that happened, I want to just cancel. I want to cancel that database entry. And it's only after the update that we're actually going to refresh the total in the bottom of that screen. So those are the types of things you can control when you have a programming language built in. Now, I could use macros. That's kind of what we have scripts, basically called macros in Access. And let's just show a brief one of that. Let's see a different way to go from order to order. So I can drop a button in here And we have this nice little toolbox here. We can drop in all these things. Now, I can put a macro in here. So I don't normally do this when designing a form. I don't usually use these wizards, but we want to show macros, so we're going to do that here. So we're going to go record navigation. We're already in that category. There's all sorts of categories here. But I'm going to go to next record. And I'm just going to keep this picture here. And normally I should name this button, but I'll just leave it here. We can do the same thing for going back one record. And of course, if I try to go backward from the first record, it's going to have a problem with that, obviously. And in a real life situation, I would want to account for that. But just for demo purposes, again, 9 out of 13, 10, 11. So this is now just a macro. If I go into here, we've embedded a macro. So this would be kind of what you would think of as a script. And it's good for simple things, like going back and forth between records, but not to try to design an entire application around macros is going to be much more work than it needs to be.